All right, everyone, welcome back to the land of Chem. I am your host and the author. My name is Jeffrey Drum. Thank you all so much for joining me again.
All right, everyone, welcome back. Now, today I will be discussing an almost completely unknown, immense network of more than 400 structures that contain a high-grade cylindrical cement core and an iron cone embedded in the bedrock below the structures. This is episode 160, the bizarre mounds of New Caledonia. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, thank you all so much for the support. I think that is it for today's intro, so without further ado, let's get right to it. All right, everyone, here we go with tonight's episode. Now, to begin, I very recently first heard about these mysterious structures and quickly became absolutely enthralled by them, not only due to the bizarre complexity of their design and construction materials, but also from my complete disgust at the utter ignorance and incompetence of the modern archaeological investigations that have occurred here. So today, I will do my best to present all of the evidence that we have in an attempt to explain the perplexing, high-quality cement, iron core mounds of the Isle of Pines, New Caledonia, starting with this comprehensive and articulate article entitled Mystery of the Tumuli by Warren Aston, link in the video description below. Stating from the abstract here, the ancient migrations settling the South Pacific remain poorly understood. This is particularly so when the New Caledonia sequence is considered and where perhaps the greatest archaeological mystery of the region awaits resolution. Scattered across the Isle of Pines, more than 400 tumuli, or mounds, shelter substantial cement blocks, many with a circular shaft running through their center. The only tumulus fully excavated also revealed a large, cone-shaped iron object buried directly beneath the shaft, function unknown. Described by two archaeologists as recently as 2015 as a, quote, kind of archaeological nightmare, end quote. The origin and purpose of the tumuli remains enigmatic. The mystery compounded by studies revealing dating thousands of years earlier than settlement models currently allow. The paper outlines various investigations over the last century before arguing that the excavation data from two seminal studies demonstrate that non-anthropic explanations, notably the long-standing avian theory, fail to address the substantial data indicating a human presence on the island predating the early modern era. A new hypothesis for the original purpose of the tumuli is presented, one based on the accumulated data. Now, on to the introduction. The Melanesian Kanak population is believed to have inhabited the Isles of New Caledonia since the so-called Lapita period around 1350 BC. The first European arrivals on the island in the early 19th century noted numerous tumuli, but the indigenous population ascribed no particular significance to them. This led to some early investigations and conjecture, but no sustained attention for many decades. Proper studies and initial excavations commenced only in 1959. Since then, scholarly opinion has advanced and discarded a range of ideas concerning the tumuli, but without a consensus to the present. Regarding the material remains, more than 400 large tumuli are dotted over much of the Isle of Pines, with a concentration on the so-called central iron plateau, plus about 20 at particular locations in the south of the main island of New Caledonia. No systematic attempt has yet been made to locate tumuli elsewhere on the main island or indeed any of the other islands of the group. Early settlers assumed that these were simply ancient burial mounds, but no graves, bones, pottery, charcoal, etc. have ever been found in them. Let me repeat that one more time. No graves, bones, pottery, charcoal, etc. have ever been found in them. So we know for sure that whatever these things are, They are absolutely not burial mounds. Continue quoting here. The locations of the tumuli generally appear to be quite random, regardless of their terrain, although in a very few places, a possible alignment or circle might be perceived in aerial images. More certain is the fact that most tumuli are rarely spaced less than 200 meters apart. The tumuli average about 3 meters in height, with a circumference ranging between 15 to 25 meters. While the majority of tumuli fall into this average size range, a handful of oval-shaped structures have also been described. One was examined measuring 3 meters high and 16 meters wide. New investigations have revealed that as much lies beneath the tumuli as above. The mounds contain a large square or oblong core made of high-grade concrete. The most detailed excavation to date of a tumulus was on the Isle of Pines in 1959, revealing a core almost 2.6 meters tall and a substantial 1.8 meters across. At several points along the height of the core, it was encircled by rings of iron oxide nodules. The oval-shaped tumulus, noted earlier, proved to have 2 concrete cores, each 2 meters in diameter and placed 5 meters apart. While the concrete cores so far examined appear to consist of homogeneous material, the upper part of one of the Paida cores that was completely demolished contained irregular pockets of soil of varying sizes. With regard to the soil intrusions, excavation data remained too limited to draw any conclusions. Most intriguingly, the Isle of Pines tumulus excavated by Chevalier in 1959 revealed that buried directly below the center of the core was a symmetrical cone or top-shaped iron object, pointing down and surrounded by 3 rings of large iron nuggets. Again, let me repeat that. Buried directly below the center of the core was a symmetrical cone or top-shaped iron object pointing down and surrounded by 3 rings of large iron nuggets. It was over 2 meters long. As will be later discussed, Chevalier's excavation of 2 tumuli at Paida also revealed puzzling features below the concrete core. One of the tumuli completely demolished on Paida revealed a separate, quote, vaguely circular slab of cement beneath it, in the middle of which was a wide 90 centimeter and deep 1.8 meter trench oriented east to west with 2 holes at different depths. The other Paida tumulus did not appear to have a comparable feature beneath the core. Another most significant feature was not noted until the excavations by Golson between 1959 and 1960. A circular, vertical shaft running from the top of the core at its center down to the base. This will be discussed further. And here you can see a map showing the extent of this mound network covering the entire island, and an original photo here of one of the double core mounds. This one showing the iron plateau at the center of the island before the modern reforestation. This entire area is composed of massive iron deposits, not only in oxide form, but also as metallic iron nodules. Now, this is what the island looks like today, and you can see this massive iron plateau formation covering most of the landscape, with some exposed areas here revealing the iron content, and this section here near the modern airport with the highest concentration of these cylinder cement core iron cone mounds, none of which are even vaguely mentioned on Google Earth or any other searches. And here on this old map, the extent of the iron plateau formation is readily apparent. Interesting side note, New Caledonia is also known for its nickel mining industries, and the soil here containing approximately 25% of the world's nickel resources. Now, This is a picture of these inconspicuous mounds from 2017 after the island has been completely reforested and taken over by new pine tree growth. Now, some background about the modern archaeological studies of these, quote, tumuli. Some of the underlying issues for some aspects of New Caledonian and more generally for South Pacific prehistory remaining in somewhat of a stalemate were discussed in this paper. The authors provided the following reasons. Firstly, over the years, research has appeared in a great range of venues and is seldom integrated. Secondly, not all findings have been published in readily available resources. And thirdly, a perceived language barrier as the main sources are obviously in French and English. Finally, one of the primary sources has some deficiencies in presenting the data, something Green and Mitchell discuss, and investigators since have not followed on consistent terminology or frame of reference. A chronological examination of the main sources revealed the long-standing confusion over how to account for the tumuli within the accepted time frame of human arrival in New Caledonia, as well as factors outlined by Green and Mitchell just noted. To examine even a brief history of modern science's attempt to understand these structures is to encounter a spectrum of human foibles, ranging from honest reporting with rational analysis to degrees of disingenuity and, above all, avoidance. No one wants to admit that these mounds were built by an ancient civilization far dating the presence of humans on this island. Early observers on the Isle of Pines realized that these scattered mounds represented a mystery and were quick to seek answers. As early as 1897, a Frenchman reported opening a tumulus but finding nothing of interest. In 1917, Englishman Compton reported in this geographical journal the, quote, remarkable dome-shaped mounds of earth. Quoting here, excavation has revealed no contents of interest. Various suggestions have been put forward to explain them, end quote. In both cases, their efforts were watched, as Compton noted, without fear by the indigenous people who, while claiming they did not make the tumuli, could give no explanation for their origin. He concluded, I am quite unable to offer any suggestion as to their origin themselves. So even the indigenous people of the island admit that they did not make them, nor do they have any explanation for where they came from. In 1949, a paper by Avias included an aerial photo showing nearly 200 tumuli on the central Iron Plateau. He proposed a series of ancient arrivals in the southern Pacific, predating the Melanesians, concluding, at least the following hypothesis can be put forward. A civilization preceded the present Kanak civilization. This civilization had a Neolithic industry more advanced than the indigenous people. That the structures contain a massive concrete core remained unsuspected and unknown until proper excavations in the Isle of Pines began in 1959. Leading the post-war vanguard of serious investigators were two archaeologists, Golson and Chevalier. From 1959 to 1960, British-born Australian archaeologist Golson led a team excavating 4 of the tumuli on the Isle of Pines, finding that there were at least 3 types of structures. Golson's team went on to map more than 120 mounds and excavated 3 of them. They viewed the concrete core as, quote, anchors, and established by probing their centers that many of the other mounds also had a cement core. As briefly noted earlier, their excavations revealed that at least several of the cores had a vertical hole running through them, many that they termed post holes, and they could not determine what the function of the shaft might serve. Golson published a brief report concluding, the mystery of the tumuli is thus, despite this spate of activity, as great as ever, who were the concrete makers of New Caledonia, and what is the function of their constructions? Native tradition is silent, and the archaeologist is yet ignorant. In 1963, he published more data from his expedition, providing a comprehensive summary of the topic. Chevalier, the French archaeologist, was led by unexpected circumstances in September 1959 to shed further light on the tumuli. Based in Noumea as a curator of the National Museum, Chevalier traveled to the Isle of Pines to investigate a report that local workers upgrading a road had encountered a solid white, quote, rock at the center of the tumulus that they were demolishing for road building material. With a half-exposed mound as a starting point, Chevalier immediately began excavating until the southern side of the tumulus core was exposed, and the unexpected object beneath it revealed. Chevalier describes it as a, quote, iron oxide rock, end quote, about 2.4 meters tall, almost as tall as the core itself, with a maximum diameter of about 1 meter, resembling a symmetrical, upside-down top or cone pointed down. At that point, the entire structure threatened to collapse. Amid several small landslides, excavation was halted. His final report was published in 1963, and it deserves a close reading. Now, some pictures here. This one showing, quote, the exposed 2-meter-high concrete core from the tumulus excavated by Chevalier in 1959, with a close-up view of the large iron nodules embedded in it. This image here showing these iron nodules and the diagram here. Close-up image of this cement core with these large iron nodules embedded in the material. And the diagram here stating Chevalier's 1963 excavation report shows the interior of the mound after excavation. The rings of iron nodules shown here surrounding the cylindrical cement core and the top-shaped object buried beneath the central core are clearly shown. So here is this cone-shaped iron object pointing downward into the ground below the mound construction itself. An absolutely bizarre feature. And I'll resume quoting here. Chevalier then examined other tumuli nearby the iron plateau, determining that at least many of them also contained a central core made of, quote, white mortar, end quote, and making particular note of the oval-shaped tumulus that contained 2 cores. Returning to Noumea, he then investigated several tumuli in the region of Paida just north of the capital. An identical situation to what happened on the Isle of Pines involving road workers was replicated in Paida, this time uncovering 2 concrete-cored tumuli about 300 meters apart. It was here that several intact snail shells found embedded in the concrete matrix of the cores and were sent with samples of the cement to a laboratory in Paris for dating. His report shows images of the exposed concrete cores of the 2 Paida tumuli being demolished. Despite anticipating further excavations that would, quote, verify the presence and shape of this cone-shaped object under the other tumuli, end quote, Chevalier's next excavations at Paida would only raise more questions. Aside from the absence of any mention of Golson's post holes in the concrete cores in his reports, those he examined remain completely analogous to those in the Isle of Pines tumuli, although, as noted earlier, the Paida cores had differing material beneath them, and the cone-shaped object was not found in these excavations. Nor does Chevalier mention returning to the Isle of Pines, although he expressed optimism that a complete excavation campaign there would be possible in the following year. Among other significant aspects, Chevalier noted that on both the Isle of Pines and at Paida, the excavations were culturally sterile. That is, no tools, pottery, charcoal, etc. could be found. The closest thing to a cultural artifact was the apparent surplus of construction materials found near the 2 Paida tumuli excavated, a quantity of lime mortar mixed with silica near one, and a 10-meter wide elevation of silica gravel near the other one. Both offered clear indications of human involvement, likely, as Chevalier recorded, being the places where the cement was prepared before being poured into the center of the tumulus to form the core. He also commented, quote, there is no doubt that the same people made the tumuli on the Isle of Pines as those made in the region of Paida. The only difference between them is that the tumuli of Paida are made with the supply of silica that is present everywhere, while those on the Isle of Pines use the, quote, iron shot, which is found in abundance on the plateau. It is also necessary to determine the origin of the mortar. Or is this the result of calcination of coral? It is curious to find no fragments of charcoal in the mortar. This indicates a space between the time of construction of the tumuli and the pre-European Melanesian era. The conclusion of his report states, many questions without answers. Summing up the facts, quote, the tumuli of New Caledonia are undoubtedly the result of ancient human activity of which there is no trace in the local tradition, end quote. Remember that the manufacture and use of lime was not known to the natives before the arrival of missionaries in 1843. One is perplexed by the importance of the work done to erect these monuments, when one thinks that a tumulus represents on average a volume of 200 cubic meters, and that on the Isle of Pines there are more than 300 tumuli, requiring a very large workforce. However, this workforce, during its work, had to leave some traces of its passage, its life, or its activities. To date, no trace, no evidence, no vestige, either inside or outside of the tumulus, has been found. Chevalier closed with the following very perceptive observation. A final question arises in our minds. The builders of the tumuli knew perfectly the principle of manufacturing and using the mortar for the erection of the cylinder. Why did they not use this knowledge for other works or realizations, their dwellings, for example? Would they have reserved this knowledge only for the tumuli, conferring to these monuments a particular character, even a sacred one? Had more attention been given to these questions by those who came after Chevalier, our understanding of these structures would have advanced more rapidly than it has, and without the avoidance of facts and obfuscation in so much of the commentary since then. Now here's where things get really interesting. On to the dating. The results of two chemical analyses of the components of the concrete appeared in Chevalier's 1963 report and are quite comparable. The primary disparity evident in the iron and silica amounts reflecting the two very different environments of origin. The dating of the mortar and snail shells from a core excavated on Paida by Chevalier was published in 1966 in a paper entitled Radiocarbon. This gave radiocarbon dates for surface and interior mortar of 7,070 plus or minus 350 years and 9,600 plus or minus 400 years before the present, respectively, plus a date for the snail shells on the surface of the cylinder at 12,900 years before the present, plus or minus 450 years. Let me say that one more time. The mortar and the snail shells found in this cement have been dated to approximately 12,900 years before the present, making these things more than 10,000 years old. Echoing Chevalier's belief that the tumuli testify to an important human activity completely extinct today, the report's authors noted that if the cores were really man-made, they are by far the most ancient mortars known. Radiocarbon data by others since has served to confirm Chevalier's very early dates. For example, 1972 dating of the tumulus cement yielded ages ranging from 4,120 to 7,710 years before the present. It is an understatement to say that the disconnect between the shell and the mortar dating and the conventional understanding of human settlement in the Pacific is unbridgeable. To contemplate people arriving in New Caledonia as early as 12,000 years ago simply cannot be massaged into the accepted scenario. Consequently, many, perhaps most of the researchers believed that the extraordinarily early snail shell dating had probably been of a much earlier material, thus allowing for the actual tumulus construction to have taken place perhaps in the Lapita period, roughly 1500 to 500 BC. Other commentators simply ignored these data. No one seems to have asked how multiple fragile snail shells survived intact for many thousands of years before finding their way onto the outside of a block of drying cement. For the shells were found on the surface of the cement, not in its interior. One shell can clearly be seen in Figure 14 of Chevalier's report. Now, on to some true archaeological incompetency and just pure ignorant nonsense regarding the exotic explanations for the construction of the mounds. All right, everyone, I hope you're enjoying the video, and if you are interested in the ancient technology of a lost civilization utilizing physics and chemistry and the function of the Egyptian pyramids and other ancient structures from across the world, please remember to subscribe to the Land of Chem here on YouTube so you don't miss out on the new episodes that premiere twice per week. If you want to help support the channel, check out thelandofchem.com. You can pick up a copy of the book or grab some merch, link in the video description below. And if you want to get access to exclusive research videos, check out the Land of Chem members only channel, now up to 22 absolutely massive research episodes that also feature some unreleased expedition footage. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, thank you all so much for the support. Now, back to the video. Unsurprisingly, the inability of archaeology over many years to provide a resolution as to the origins of the tumuli led to several proposals far from mainstream thinking. This began as early as 1949 with the working hypothesis already noted. After a vain attempt to locate patterns in the placement of the tumuli and any correspondences to the southern constellations, Avius broadened his studies to all other traces from the past, such as petroglyphs and pottery styles across New Caledonia. His paper offered suggestions that a Neolithic culture predating the present Kanak civilization may have been influenced by, or perhaps even originated in, certain Eastern cultures, specifically the Chinese and Japanese. He developed an earlier thought expressed first in 1931 that from Japan, the Ainu people may have explored the Pacific Islands. While not subscribing to such views themselves, other researchers also mentioned the most extreme hypotheses were advanced to explain the presence of the tumuli, noting in particular, quote, extraterrestrials or mysterious populations now extinct practicing solar rites. So these things are so bizarre and inexplicable, especially in regard to the conventional timeline of human occupation of the island, that even conventional archaeologists and academics have gone so far as to propose that they were constructed by extraterrestrials on the island. Absolutely crazy. Resume quoting here. One of the greatest ironies is that attempts to explain the tumuli by invoking incursions by distant explorers, inhabitants of the legendary continents of Mu, Atlantis, or Aurori Sun Kingdom, or extraterrestrials now appear somewhat less fanciful than they once seemed, especially when more prosaic explanations are compared. This is no more so than the avian theory discussed next. Wait till you hear this. The avian theory of 1985. So in late 1985, after the bones of an extinct bird species were found in New Caledonia, these people published an article proposing that the birds may have formed each tumulus by scraping ferritic soil into giant mounds in which eggs could be deposited and incubated until hatched. Left unexplained was how somehow this process produced massive linear block of cement in the interior with a hole running through it, in at least one case, a large cone-shaped iron object buried directly below that. They concluded that, quote, the giant bird hypothesis is just as reasonable as the theory that these mounds were built by ancient humans who know how to make cement. This statement perfectly embodies the absolute ignorance and incompetence of archaeologists. They are saying to propose that giant extinct birds made these mounds is just as reasonable as the theory of ancient civilizations who knew how to make cement. Utter incompetence and ignorance. Furthermore here, from this quite cautious proposal, the idea caught hold. Notably, other authors came to accept this naturalistic explanation for the mounds as outlined in an article. Those mysterious mounds are for the birds. Green's article gives good background on how the megapod theory was first pressed into service to explain the mounds. That redeeming feature aside, the reader needs to take some giant leaps of faith. The concrete cores are explained away as a wholly natural action of microorganisms, tiny globules of calcite in the soil somehow binding rocks and debris together. Later on, it was proposed that the nesting birds also introduce vegetation into the mounds, which decayed, providing heat for the eggs. Subsequently, a refinement of the theory proposed that these megapode tidally excreted into the hole on the top of the mound, and the feces becoming a part of the heating agent for the eggs. Over time, the droppings are presumed to have fossilized and become the, quote, cement found today. This was literally a theory explaining the construction of these mounds to avoid possibly associating it with an ancient civilization that knew how to make concrete. The megapode theory failed to account for what qualified archaeologists actually found in the tumuli, the components of the concrete and the iron artifacts around and beneath the core. It typically did not concern its proponents that had no trace of bird shell or other material that would normally indicate an avian presence had been found. Of course, not all scholars accepted the avian theory. Some indicate their tacit acceptance of an anthropic origin for the tumuli, sometimes in regard to the political implications of any notion of pre-Melanesian settlement presents. For example, this guy mentions in his article, others remain open to the human origin of the tumuli without taking a firm position. A 1995 paper by other authors was open to earlier arrivals, noting the evidence for human occupation 28,000 years ago on other islands nearby the Solomons. They noted the divided opinions on the mounds, stating that, quote, no cultural material or bird remains, end quote, have ever been found, but avoided any direct mention of the cores. Again, archaeological avoidance, ignorance, and incompetence. In 1999, Stevenson noted that human arrivals earlier the Lapita culture would remain speculative as long as human origin for the so-called tumuli of New Caledonia is entertained. The avian theory continued to be uncritically accepted when it reinforced more general positions. A representative statement from anthropologist O'Connor argued in 2010 against the 1986 Gibbons and Clooney proposal for the Pleistocene voyaging between the eastern edge of Australian continent and New Caledonia. Their two primary arguments for the voyaging rested on the reduced distances needed for ocean crossings when the sea levels were lower, and the reported human derivation of the series of tumuli or artificial mounds on the interior plateau of the Isle of Pines. O'Connor's comment regarding the tumuli was that they dated to 12,000 years before the present and have been shown to be built by megapodes, these birds, beginning as a well-intentioned attempt at explanation for the many megapode theory became a convenience to avoid dealing with the possibility of a pre-Lapita human presence. But it was fiction all the same. After all, the actual components of the cement cores have been known since Golson and Chevalier's work was published, and along with other items we would expect if birds were involved, neither phosphorus nor any fragments of eggshells have ever been found in the tumuli. The avian theory was dealt a fatal blow in 2016 with the publication of a paper by Trevor Worthy. Significantly, Christopher Sand was a co-author, and the paper discusses the avian explanation for the tumuli, as stated here, that this bird has been identified as a possible maker of the mounds. However, there is no evidence of association of this species with these mounds, and eggshells has not been found in them, despite the calcareous nature of at least those in the Isle of Pines. Given that our analysis of this species has no enhanced morphological adaptations for digging, such as those displayed by certain megapodes, it is most unlikely that it is responsible for these tumuli. So these birds do not even have the physiological capability of digging or making mounds. The paper concluded as follows: our finding that it is a stem galliform and thus not a megapode makes it most unlikely to have been a mound builder, as this scenario would require both mound building and ectothermic incubation to have evolved twice. Furthermore, this species shows no specific adaptation for digging to facilitate mound building, unlike all extant megapoids, making it even more unlikely that it had exhibited exothermic incubation. Okay, so good. At least they finally came to the conclusion that there is no way to explain these things as naturally occurring made by birds. All right, the next proposal, the environmental theory from 2016, buried within the text reproduced above, lay the author's replacement theory to explain the tumuli, stating here, instead, these tumuli are likely to have been formed by an interplay of vegetation and erosion, as suggested for similar mounds elsewhere. Interesting note here is that they make the comparison between these mounds in New Caledonia and the Mima mounds that are found all over the U.S. All right, thus what we call the environmental theory was introduced. In essence, it proposes that calcite concretion may have developed around the root complex of a long-rotted tree, leading to differential erosion in the landscape. Such structures are variously known by such names as Mima-like mounds or other earthen mounds, and are found in various environments around the world. However, an examination of this phenomenon reveals stark differences between such formations and the tumuli. They are utterly unlike other tumuli discussed in this paper. Not only do the former have smaller dimensions, but these formations lack the tumulus's central concrete pillar, not to mention its central shaft and iron appendages. This suggestion is perhaps even less plausible than the avian theory it replaces. So this geological explanation was also thrown out, and let's move on to even more archaeological nonsense, where they blatantly refuse to evaluate the construction itself and just call everything a burial. Sound familiar? We'll state here. In 2008, an important development began with the publication by these authors, stating in the paper that it included a detailed description of the two mounds found on the Isle of Pines excavated, noting that the two mound likely had original dimensions approximating the concrete core tumuli, but its interior was taken up with 3 levels of human burial. So they found some mounds in a completely different area that did have burials in them, and they attempted to compare them to the mounds that were found on the Isle of Pines, which contained absolutely zero evidence of human interment. The author then resumes here, how can we reconcile the fact that the interiors of the burial mounds and the tumuli are in truth radically different? What can account for such a disconnect between the uncontested archaeological evidence and such explanations as this report offers? Are we seeing the rise of a new default position to replace the discredited avian theory? If so, then as with all other attempts at explaining the tumuli, it comes at the expense of the archaeological evidence. As the time of this writing, such questions remain unresolved. Now, here in this section entitled New Investigations from 2017, the author's explorations of the Isle of Pines commenced in 2017 and first undertook a detailed examination of the original tumulus excavated by Chevalier. This was to reveal that this concrete core had a circular vertical shaft throughout its length. As Chevalier's excavation report did not mention such a significant feature with this unanticipated find was initially perplexing, but it was concluded that his excavation had not cleared the entire summit of the tumulus before work was abruptly halted. Thus, the opening at the very center of the top of the core, about 1 foot 30 centimeters in diameter, was missed by him. After Chevalier returned to the main island, local workers continued removing the mound's iron gravel as a source of road-making material until only the concrete core remained, but the shaft would have been of little interest if noticed at all. In fact, as already noted, Ingolson's survey report had mentioned this feature in many of the tumuli he and his team had examined. In his notes, Golsom designated the concrete cores as, quote, anchors, and the shafts as, quote, post holes, but could not suggest the purpose the latter served. And here is a close-up of the improved diagram with the central vertical shaft here, the cement cylindrical core, the mound of iron gravel, and the most enigmatic and unexplored feature, this iron cone below the mounds. For the love of God, someone please go to this friggin' island and pull one of these out of the ground already. And some pictures here showing this vertical central shaft down through the mound. You can see the material concrete cylindrical core here. Now, a quick announcement. I just added a new tier to the members only platform for anyone that's interested. Tier 1, the initiates, get access to one exclusive research video every month. And now the new tier, alchemists, will get a second research episode and a completely unscripted, unedited Q&A video. Ask me anything, no holes barred, anything goes. Link in the video description below. Also, members only 23 just dropped underground caves below Giza, the source of sulfur, and the sulfur dioxide inlet shaft. And the first Tier 2 Alchemist video will be Teotihuacan. Thank you all so much for the support, and I'll see you on the dark side on the members only channel. Now here we have the chemical analysis data regarding the cement, stating here, from abundant large-scale excavation debris still surrounding the tumulus, the author obtained samples of the interior concrete and submitted them for elemental composition analysis in an Australian laboratory. Following is a comparison of the results from Chevalier's analysis and the 2018 analysis of the same structure. So the chemical analysis of this cement contains an abundant amount of iron oxide, iron, aluminum oxide, calcium oxide, traces of magnesium, and silicon dioxide. Now onto some hypotheses regarding the construction. This series here, proposed by Chevalier, and this updated sequence proposed by the author of this article. I won't read this whole thing here, but stage 2 was of particular interest. So after the excavation down into the bedrock, this stage was followed by the placement into the hole of an almost 3-meter long iron cone-shaped object with its point downward, with at least 3 rings of iron nuggets placed around it, perhaps to stabilize it into a vertical position. Their presence, incidentally, makes it clear that the cone-shaped object is not an artifact from iron being leached from the surface and somehow precipitating into a geometrical shape below the tumulus. So this is saying this is not from leached iron precipitating down into this cone-shaped formation. This is a legitimate iron object that was intentionally placed down into the hole beneath these mounds. And some conclusions here regarding the function of the tumuli, stating that it could be a burial site, it could be an elevated vantage point, a ceremonial or ritual center, or an artistic expression, none of which are consistent with the archaeological evidence. So a new proposal here mentions some interesting details. By showing what the tumuli are not and cannot be, the purpose of the structures can now be proposed with some certainty. From an engineering viewpoint, the large cement blocks within the tumuli have the primary purpose of stabilizing a circular pillar or pylon, standing in the vertical shaft of the core, but later removed or decomposed, for no trace of them now remains, nor is there any hint of what the pillar or pylon may have supported and why it required such a degree of stabilization, as evidenced by the massive cement base. Determining this is now a challenge going forward. Ascertaining the function of the cone-shaped metal object beneath the shaft may also offer the most promising line for future investigation. Nothing to date suggests that the tumuli construction took place over an extended period where we would expect to see some improvisations or development of different styles. Everything suggests a one-time concentrated effort. So this huge network of 400 iron core cement mounds was one construction project. Only 2 of the Paita tumuli preserve any trace of surplus raw material of the construction process, and just possibly of a stage of earlier experimentation with local materials. If so, we can speculate that the silica-based process found in Paita may have been abandoned in favor of the iron resources that are readily on the Isle of Pines near this iron plateau. And the concluding remarks here: more answers will reveal themselves when modern archaeologists engage more fully with the structures than they have before. It would require little effort to completely reveal the interiors of those structures that are already partly or even fully exposed. In particular, the large cone-shaped iron structure, which is the most likely feature to fully reveal final answers to the mystery. Someone go and dig up this friggin' iron cone already. Was this a type of anchor, such as our modern anchor spears for the pylon or pillar sitting directly above? While this artifact has only been reported from one site, it beggars belief to think that Chevalier chanced upon the one tumulus that had a symmetrical cone-shaped metal object positioned exactly below the shaft in the central core. It must be an integral part of other tumuli. For that matter, we cannot be sure that nothing else lies beneath the cone itself. No one has looked. The incongruity of the scientific establishment, particularly archaeologists and historians, in having excavation reports since 1963 while still proposing solutions that do not in any way account for what lies within the structures is staggering. The tumuli, after all, remain readily available for examination. This inaction must represent, in a large part at least, the instinctive avoidance of something that challenges present paradigms about human settlement in the South Pacific. And some fascinating questions are proposed here. The identity of the tumuli builders remains, of course, the crux of the mystery, but they certainly predated the arrival of the Melanesians, who became the generally regarded indigenous culture and had no ability to manufacture concrete. Who were these people? Where did the ability to make high-quality concrete come from at a time when this technology was unknown? What possible motivation or purpose could cause a people to invest so much effort to erect more than 400 of these structures, each averaging a volume of more than 500 cubic meters? Why did such a massive effort leave no other traces of its life and activities? No tools, no bones, no charcoal, pottery, or other cultural artifacts, either within the tumulus or around it. Why did they not use this ability to construct other works, their dwellings, their burials, and their sacred places before, during, or after the tumuli construction? Over time, why was the ability to manufacture such a useful material as concrete not exported to the other islands? Why was this capacity not passed down to the Melanesians, who became generally regarded as the indigenous culture? Indeed, why did this capacity of making concrete not arise elsewhere in the region? The prescient questions of Chevalier, pondering the mysteries of a distant unknown people who knew how to make durable concrete on a large scale, still await resolution. Now, when I first started researching these mounds, my mind immediately connected them to a formation that I recently revealed here regarding the construction of the Giza Plateau pyramids. Remember episode 150? The iron core of the Great Pyramid, showing evidence for the iron-permeated bedrock core upon which the Great Pyramid was built, and its function for the uptake of electric current from telluric currents and the distribution of electric currents from lightning across the plateau. In my opinion, there is a direct connection between the technology and function of these two ancient constructions. More on this in a future episode. All right, everyone, that is it for today's video. This was episode 160, the bizarre cement cylinder iron core mounds of New Caledonia. I really hope you enjoyed today's video, and in the next episode in the series, Sunday Site Visit 105. This is an episode you do not want to miss, so if you haven't already, please subscribe to the Land of Chem here on YouTube. If you're interested in the technology of a lost civilization, utilizing physics and chemistry, and the function of the Egyptian pyramids and other ancient structures from across the world. If you want to help support the channel and pick up a copy of the book, check out thelandofchem.com, or you can subscribe to the members-only channel to get access to exclusive research content. Links in the video description below. If you want to follow me on Instagram or on X, my handle is @thelandofchem. Also, don't forget, after you finish watching this video, please go subscribe to our 3 other channels, Ancient Odysseys, Let's Go with Lex and G, and the best channel on YouTube, Egyptian Trash Cats, for all you cat lovers out there. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, thank you all so much for the support. I think that is it for today's episode, so I will see you next time. Yo, are you still watching this? Please subscribe to the Land of Chem here on YouTube and click that little notification button. New videos coming out every single week. And check out this other episode. Come on, do it. Do it now.